The story of a beautiful princess who marries a powerful king, uniting two great kingdoms. We imagine lavish feasts, breathtaking gowns, and a love that will echo through the ages. But for the real women who wore the crowns, the fairy tale often ended the moment the wedding vows were spoken. The most anticipated part of any wedding, the wedding night, was not a moment of romantic bliss. For a medieval queen, it was often the beginning of a lifelong ordeal, a night filled with terror, pressure, and profound uncertainty. What truly happened behind the velvet curtains of the royal bedchamber? Why was a night meant for celebration so often a source of sheer dread? Prepare yourself, because the truth is far darker, more political, and more brutal than any storybook has ever dared to tell. First and foremost, we must erase any modern notion of romance. A royal marriage in the medieval period was rarely, if ever, about love. It was a cold, hard business transaction. A queen was not a partner, she was a political asset, a living seal on a treaty between nations. Her body was the currency used to purchase peace, forge an alliance, or acquire land. From the moment she was born, she was groomed for this single purpose. Imagine being a young woman, perhaps barely a teenager, told that the fate of your entire country, the lives of thousands of soldiers, and the stability of the continent rest squarely on your shoulders. The success of this grand political merger depended on one thing, the consummation of the marriage. This wasn't a private matter between two people. It was an act of state. Failure to perform, or any hitch in the proceedings, could be interpreted as a slight, a bad omen, or even a deliberate breaking of the treaty. The pressure was immense. This young queen wasn't just meeting her husband, she was meeting a king whose political and military ambitions were now tied directly to her ability to fulfill her duty in the marriage bed. The weight of two kingdoms was on her as she walked to that chamber. Now, add another layer of fear, the man waiting for her was, in all likelihood, a complete and utter stranger. Queens were often shipped across countries, sometimes across the entire known world, to marry their new husbands. They didn't get to date or have a courtship. Often, they had never even seen a reliable portrait of the man they were legally bound to. Consider Isabella of Valois, who was married to King Richard II of England at the age of 6. While her marriage wasn't consummated for years, she was still sent to a foreign land, surrounded by people who spoke a language she didn't understand, to live with a man she didn't know. For queens who were older, the wedding night was their very first meeting. This man could be old, cruel, physically repulsive, or kind. She had no idea. She had to place her entire life, and her body, into the hands of a man whose culture, language, and customs were completely alien to her. He wasn't just a stranger, he represented a foreign power that her own country might have recently been at war with. She was, in essence, being forced into the most intimate situation possible with a potential enemy. The isolation and fear of being in a foreign court, unable to communicate her terror, is almost impossible for us to comprehend today. If the idea of being with a stranger wasn't terrifying enough, imagine the whole world was watching. Or at least, the most important people in the kingdom. The medieval royal wedding night wasn't a private affair. It was often concluded with a bizarre and humiliating ritual known as the bedding ceremony. After the feasting and dancing, the bride and groom would be ceremonially undressed by their courtiers and escorted to the marriage bed. Bishops and priests would bless the bed to encourage fertility, and then, in front of a room full of nobles, politicians, and family members, the couple was expected to get into bed together. Sometimes the curtains were drawn, but the witnesses would often remain in the room, or just outside the door, waiting for any sign that the marriage had been consummated. In some cases, they would wait for the bloodied sheets to be presented the next morning as proof of the bride's virginity and the consummation. This wasn't just about sex, it was about public proof. The entire court, and by extension the entire kingdom, needed to know that the alliance was sealed. For a young queen, this was the ultimate violation of privacy, a deeply personal and potentially painful moment turned into a piece of public theater. Once the public spectacle was over, the private pressure began, and it was relentless. A queen had one primary job: produce a male heir. Her value, her safety, and her position in the court were all contingent on her fertility, specifically her ability to birth a son. From the very first night, this pressure was on. The wedding night wasn't just about consummation, it was the first attempt to create the next king. If she failed to conceive quickly, whispers would start. Was she barren? Had God cursed the union? Her husband's eye might begin to wander, and political factions within the court could use her perceived failure to undermine her position or advocate for the king to set her aside. Look at Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII. Her entire life in England became a desperate and tragic struggle to produce a male heir. Her failure to do so ultimately led to her divorce, the creation of a new church, and years of political and religious turmoil. For a queen on her wedding night, she knew that this single act was the start of a lifelong trial. Her womb was not her own, it belonged to the state, and its performance was under constant, unforgiving scrutiny. The portraits and paintings often hide another grim reality, the staggering age differences. It was incredibly common for medieval kings, who might be widowers or marrying for the first time later in life, to take extremely young brides. We're not talking about a 10 or 15-year gap. We're talking about seasoned, often battle-hardened men in their 30s, 40s, or even 50s marrying girls who were just 12, 13, or 14 years old. These girls were children. They had just passed the age of consent, which was horrifyingly low by our standards, often 12 for girls and 14 for boys. They were physically and emotionally unprepared for a marital relationship. This wasn't a union of equals, it was a situation of absolute power imbalance. The king was not just her husband, he was her sovereign, her ruler. She had no right to refuse him. There was no concept of marital consent as we understand it. For a child bride, the wedding night was a state-sanctioned assault, an introduction to a physical relationship she couldn't possibly understand or be ready for, with a man who held absolute power over her life. Beyond the politics and the power dynamics lay a more fundamental terror, the physical act itself. Medieval society was incredibly prudish on the surface, and young noblewomen were raised with virtually no education about their own bodies or the mechanics of sex. She would know it was her duty, she would know it was to produce heirs, but she would likely have no idea what to actually expect. Her understanding would be pieced together from religious warnings about the sins of the flesh, hushed whispers from ladies-in-waiting, and the clinical reality that her virginity was a prized commodity that had to be proven. The first sexual experience is often nerve-wracking for anyone, but imagine it being with a powerful stranger, with zero emotional intimacy, and with the expectation that it might be painful. There was no concept of female pleasure being important, the goal was consummation and conception. This clinical, often forceful introduction to intimacy, shrouded in ignorance and fear, could be a deeply traumatic experience that would color the rest of the queen's marital life. What if, for whatever reason, the consummation didn't happen? Maybe the king was physically unable, or the queen was too terrified, or there was a simple lack of chemistry. The consequences were catastrophic, especially for the queen. A marriage that was not consummated could be annulled by the church. It would be as if it never happened. This sounds like a potential escape route, but it was actually a path to ruin. An annulment would be a public declaration of failure. The queen would be seen as flawed, perhaps barren or undesirable. She would be sent back to her home country in disgrace, her family humiliated, and the political alliance she was meant to secure would be shattered, potentially even leading to war. Her entire life's purpose would have been for nothing. She would be a used commodity, her reputation destroyed, making her difficult to marry off to anyone else of significance. So, while she may have feared the consummation, she also had to fear the consequences of not consummating the marriage. It was an impossible, no-win situation. Finally, a queen's fear wasn't just about the king or the physical act. It was about the entire court. A royal court was a treacherous place, filled with powerful families all vying for influence. The wedding night was a key moment in that power struggle. If the king was pleased with his new queen, her family's faction might gain power. If he was displeased, her enemies would pounce. From the moment she arrived, she was being watched. Ladies-in-waiting were not always friends, they were often spies for other factions. They would be listening at the door, scrutinizing her mood the next day, and reporting every detail back to their masters. Was she happy? Did she cry? Does the king seem fond of her? A perceived failure on the wedding night could be used as a weapon against her for years to come. She wasn't just entering a marriage, she was entering a snake pit, and her performance on the first night could determine whether she would be a player or a victim in the brutal game of courtly politics. So, the next time you see a fairy tale about a princess marrying her king, remember the reality behind the fantasy. For a medieval queen, the wedding night was not the happy ending. It was a terrifying confluence of immense political pressure, public humiliation, and profound personal violation. She was a pawn, a stranger in a strange land, and a child forced into an adult's world, where her entire worth was tied to her performance in a single night. Her fears were real, they were justified, and they paint a much more complex and tragic picture of the women who wore the crown. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the darker side of history. What part of a medieval queen's ordeal do you find the most shocking? Was it the public bedding ceremony or the immense pressure to produce an heir? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video informative and want to uncover more historical truths, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Sharing this with a fellow history lover helps the channel more than you know. Thanks for watching.